remote. You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name and politics is our game, and we will be doing politics this evening because we have as our guest Steve Greenberg. He is the Republican nominee in the 8th Congressional District. He is taking on now 4th-year Democrat incumbent Melissa Bean. So that should be a tough race, an interesting race. Obviously, Bean having now been in her 4th year, and with this state becoming more and more a blue state, has to be a favorite. So this is an uphill battle for Mr. Greenberg. But the thing to know, if you're watching this show and you're not in the 8th Congressional District, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on, don't turn that dial, because no matter where you are, as we like to say, whether it's in the 6th with Roscom and Morgenthaler, whether it's in the 9th with Schakowsky and Young, whether it's in the 11th with Ozinga and Halverson, the 13th with Harper and Biggert, the 14th with Foster and Oberweis, the 16th with Don Manzullo and Robert Abood. Wherever you are, and anywhere else down the state, maybe you may be watching this on the Illinois channel, the issues we're talking about are not specific just to the 8th Congressional District. These are key bread and butter issues that everybody's facing wherever you are in the state of Illinois, in fact, outside the state of Illinois. About our guest, we'll come back to a bit more, but very briefly, he is self-described a successful businessman. We'll talk about that. Melissa Bean described herself at one point as a successful businesswoman. So we can have that discussion. You might be asking right off the bat, before we hear more about Steve Greenberg, where is Melissa Bean? We'll be talking about that. Where is she? She's not here. She was invited. So her being not here, that is her choosing, her right. As we said, Steve Greenberg, a successful businessman. He is also somebody who's played professional hockey, played on the minor league level. He worked in business with his family business. He's now been on his own, he would say, as a turnaround specialist. Would that be accurate?
That would be accurate, yes.
And so, Steve, if you're talking about turning things around, gas prices, that's on people's mind as you go door to door in the 8th Congressional District, right?
It's the #1 issue. Ultimately, the American people are paying a price at the pump, and the do-nothing Congress has really put the people behind the 8 ball, and I hope to be an influencer in turning that around.
There's a big difference between you and Congresswoman Bean on gas prices. One thing you've come out for is offshore drilling, right? An expansion of offshore drilling.
Yes.
You've come out for drilling in ANWR. You've come out for nuclear power. All as ways to increase supply and lower the price. Long run, maybe short run. Your opponent, Congresswoman Bean, where is she on offshore drilling, drilling in ANWR, nuclear power?
Well, my opponent's against offshore drilling, and really has taken the stance of where Nancy Pelosi has put the Democrat Party, which is only new technologies. And I personally believe we need to do all the above. It's part of the reason the people are paying the price at the pump is, well, they were very quick to take the vacation for 5 weeks and go off to their various comfort zones. The American people are paying a dear price every day, and hardworking families. We were just at a food pantry the other day where I spoke with a gentleman who's costing him an extra $120 a month to go back and forth to work, and you hear stories like that, and they got to supplement some groceries. That's just unacceptable. And the fact that Melissa Bean was the deciding vote to send everyone on vacation, I think is really a miss for what the district needs.
It was one vote. There was a one-vote margin.
Yes.
The House voted to take a 5-week vacation.
Yes.
To adjourn. That adjournment vote, what was it, 213 to 212?
Yes, 213 to 212.
So the tie-breaking vote was Melissa Bean?
Yes.
And has she said anything about that?
No, and nor has my opponent said much about anything. I think, running a few commercials at the end, putting as much as she can on her career, I think that's all she wants to do in this election.
Now, has she said she's opposed with Pelosi to offshore drilling or an expansion of offshore drilling?
She has said as recently as the Daily Herald stated this week that she's against offshore drilling.
Has she given a reason why, environmental reasons?
She has not given a reason why, short of the fact, oh yes, she has. She said, I do not believe that it will increase, it will have the kind of impact at the pump. And I think it's amazing to me that anyone out there would vote for anyone who doesn't understand the basics of supply and demand. Increasing supply will absolutely bring down the price.
And how long does it take? Now, let's be fair. Some of the critics, especially the Democratic critics, have said, we're taping this on August 10th, 2008.
Yeah.
They're saying, hey, if by the time, once you you let out those leases, once they decide where the oil is, once it's changed into gas, et cetera, distilled, refined, we're talking, they say, 5–10 years, and even so, then a small effect on prices. What do you say to those folks?
I say that it is going to take years, as many as 6 years, 7 years before we actually see the full flow of this. But you also have to attack the lack of refineries that we have right now. We're at about a 90% capacity, which means any blip in our system to refine, take it from crude to the street, if one of those break down, the price is going to spike up. But where the impact is just as we saw the president showing leadership recently on saying that he lift the ban on the executive branch level, the congressional lift of the ban would open up the markets to push downward because they'd be seeing a path to loosening and opening up a new player to the energy side of things.
So you're saying because of futures markets and so forth, the effect, even though the actual drilling and production of the oil may be years down the road, prices can be affected this year?
Yeah, I mean, it's like
for gas, prices of gas.
Absolutely, because it's like two retail stores. If I'm from the retail side of things as well, and if a retail store says he's moving in about a year from now, watch the prices of the retail store that's currently holding that community's attention. Prices will start dropping. They know a competitor's coming in. There's a lot of things that are effects of saying, hey, America's open for business. We want to create American production of oil, create American jobs. I don't understand how anyone could stand in the way of that. I think it's a priority for this nation. And
drilling in ANWR, that's something you support?
I do, but there's also something, Jeff, we need to also focus on. You're talking about $1.5 billion a day going to people who want to do harm to this nation. I think most Americans don't realize that we give per person $200 to the Saudi king for having the right to have oil, $2,000 to foreign national companies for oil. This is not just about energy independence, it's also about energy security. And for the Democrats to say what they're saying, I think to keep us safer, we need to keep our American production of oil going in this country and expand it.
But it is a world market, so even oil produced in the United States may end up going overseas. We may end up buying overseas. That's how a world market operates, right?
Sure, absolutely. But what you want to do is you want to put America in play as one of the people that are producing it. That is only a short-term fix because we need to have alternatives. We need to have a long-term John Kennedy approach. You know, just because Sputnik beat them up in the air didn't mean that we weren't going to compete.
All right, so you get back on offshore, you expand offshore drilling, you also expand or permit drilling in ANWR.
Yes.
Bean says no because of environmental reasons.
I believe she's been hijacked by the left. Obviously in this situation, in addition to that, whatever the special interest groups that are pulling her strings and Nancy Pelosi, obviously this is a bipartisan problem and both people, both sides, the Republicans and Democrats alike, I think are at fault because this is something that you need people who are going to forecast problems and get ahead of the curve, and obviously the current leadership or lack thereof has not done the right things for the district.
Now the thing is, I mean, Congresswoman Bean may have some defenses for that. We've asked her to be on. The last time she was on this show in January, it was January of 2006. She came on in the fall of 2004 on this show and criticized Phil Crane, then the incumbent, for not being out here, not coming on this show and so forth, and now she seems to be doing the same thing. But we'd like her to be here. We'd like to give her a fair shot. We'd rather hear her views from Congresswoman Bean as opposed to what Steve Greenberg has to say about it. But that's her choice, so you folks should know that. We've labeled this a virtual conversation because this is between Bean and Greenberg, because this is as close as we can come. But that's her choosing, okay? And I'm not sure why it is. But she's not going to be here. Okay.
Well, the simple.
At least that's what they're telling me. Maybe if Team Bean is watching this, and you change your mind, you get a standing invitation to have your candidate, your incumbent Congresswoman Melissa Bean, on this show, Public Affairs, whenever you want.
Well, the simple fact is, and I think it's how do you defend the indefensible? No matter what she has advocated for, the fact is that the gas prices have doubled since she has been in Congress. And we need to make sure that there's people who can forecast the problem before it becomes a problem. I think oil is the best example of a do-nothing Congress, and the end results are the people pay the price.
But you're for solar, you're for shale, you're for wind, clean coal,
absolutely,
plug-in cars. So you're not saying to the exclusion of that, you're just saying in addition to all those things I just mentioned, you'd sign on to all those things, right?
Actually, in my 8-point plan, one of the key priorities was reinvesting the money that we get on offshore leases. that we get from the oil companies, we actually reinvest that into new.
Does.
Yeah, the government should reinvest that into new technologies.
New technologies. Okay.
Absolutely.
So on that, now is Bean come out for all of those things that we mentioned? Solar, shale, wind, clean coal, plug-in cars. I mean, is she with you on that?
Oh, you know what? Melissa Bean has got to come on your show and speak for herself more than myself. I don't think it's the main thing is I want to tell you where my vision, where I want to take the district, and how I want to remember that the customers back home, not the people in D.C.
Taxes, that's a big deal. You were for, or tell me, are you for making the Bush tax cuts permanent, the ones that were put into place in 2001 and 2003? They're set to sunset, I believe, in 2009, 2010, 2009. Yeah. Would you make those permanent, all of them?
Well, I think the debate needs to be, instead of just focusing on where the Bush tax cuts are today, I actually believe we need to go lower. The American people, it has shown for the American government that drives the revenues up when we lower the taxes. American people are hurting. The best bailout we could give people, the most purest bailout, is give them more money in their pocket. I think.
Which ones would you cut lower?
Well, right now we're not competitive internationally. We're losing a lot of business overseas.
Corporate tax rates you'd cut lower? How much? What would you cut it to?
Well, we're 3 times that of Ireland.
So what is it now, and where would you put it?
I would say over time we need to get competitive internationally that welcomes people to open their shops, hopefully in the 8th District when I'm the congressman, but ultimately get people to come back in the States.
Would you also would you cut or keep what the rates are now, capital gains, dividends?
You've got to keep capital gains at a minimum where it is today, and if you go lower, I think it would help with reinvestment, because the reinvestment of capital gains where it's generated is.
Where is it now, 10 or 15%?
15%, but the biggest thing is.
And Obama wants to talk about raising it to where it was, 28%?
And that's a great example of somebody who's never been in the real world.
So is Bean going with Obama that? Because
Absolutely.
She's got a picture of, obviously Obama's popular. There's a picture of Bean and Obama together on their website.
She declared herself an Obama mama.
Did she?
She absolutely did. And that means to me that she's attached the idea that that growth capital, and that's what it is when you take private equity money, that's coming from the cap gains people, and ultimately that's helping small businesses get to big business.
But she said in January of 2006 she was for those Bush tax cuts, the tax cuts on dividends and capital gains, because of the people in her district who would benefit from that. You say she's backing off from that?
I'm saying Melissa Bean is doing whatever is politically expedient at this point to stay in office and to be attached to something she assumes is popular. That's what's wrong with Washington. Ultimately, do whatever I have to do, or say whatever I have to say that's expedient to keeping a pin on my
You want to have those marginal rates on income that were cut, you keep them low?
Absolutely.
Across the board, low income, middle income, high income?
Absolutely. It's a non-negotiable for Steve Greenberg.
Okay. Let's go over to the housing crisis, so-called housing crisis, $300 billion bailout for the likes of Countrywide and other big-time lenders. They were bailed out, so were some people who perhaps took some irresponsible loans. If you had been in the House at that time, would you have supported that bailout? The president supported that bailout.
Yeah, I disagree. I think the great Oprah show that's going on where we give away the people's money is ridiculous. And the pen signing ceremony, even the president.
So you wouldn't have voted for that bailout?
Well, no, I wouldn't have. And one of the things that really the problem with it is that it's freed up the housing, the banks to foreclose more. The cause and effect of this is that the banks have been secured, and now the folks back home, they don't have to cut a deal with them.
Did Bean support that bailout?
Yeah, she did.
So that's another point where you differ.
Absolutely.
So you differ on gas prices and what to do about it. You differ on taxes. You differ on the mortgage crisis. I'm sensing there's a choice here, not an echo.
No, there's absolutely.
Is that all
by the way, it's a great point. It's choice versus an echo.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The economy. People say it's the economy, stupid, but you know something about this. You're not so much an academic economist, but you are somebody who's been in business for what, 10, 15, 20 years?
17 years.
17 years. There are a lot of people, a lot of the media were saying, the mainstream media were saying, we're going to find out. They said this in January, said this in March, said this in May of 2008. We're going to find out we're in the middle of a recession. The data come out for the first 2 quarters. GDP, gross domestic product, went up 0.9% the first quarter, 1.9% the second quarter. Usually people define a recession as 2 successive declines in GDP. Instead, we've had 2 successive increases.
Yeah.
So, is it really the economy? Is the economy that bad?
Well, I think people are hurting out there. We can't disconnect the numbers, but when you go with the facts, if you use the same metrics that they used in the Clinton administration, by those metrics, we're not in a recession. But there are people hurting out there. You can't get away from that. When I knock on doors.
So what do we do for those people? You know, Obama, we'll use him as a guide. He says We had one stimulus. The president went along with that. He wants a second stimulus.
I think it's wrong.
I don't think McCain says that. McCain says not so much on the second stimulus.
I think the best stimulus is one that doesn't give the power to Washington to pick who gets it.
So cut taxes, use that stimulus?
Well, listen, if they have more money in their pocket, also help drive the price of oil down, because folks, that kills the people back home. I hate to revert back to this, but it shouldn't be only the rich that could drive to Wisconsin or to Indiana from Chicago. I mean, it is costing families a bundle out there, and people are hurting. And we need to have somebody who understands that policies have a bottom line. People have to live with them behind those policies.
Gas prices are coming down. The average across the country went, I think, from something like $4.11 to $3.89 in the last month. Oil prices even more so, went from $145 a barrel to something like $118.
Yeah.
So oil prices are coming down, gas prices are coming down. It's interesting, when we had the show with Congresswoman Bean in January of 2006, we were also talking about gas prices. And at that point, it had skyrocketed to $3. Well, we were talking about what to do then. So this is not a new issue.
No.
And it's a legit issue to ask, you know, maybe the Democrats didn't have control for the last 8 years, only the last 2, but they did have an impact. And it's a legit issue to ask Republicans, to be fair, because people knew about this. It wasn't like it just happened last week, right?
Well, I think that's,
I mean, would you point the finger at some of your Republican colleagues who controlled the House from '94 to 2006, and would you say they didn't really do anything?
I would tell you that the Republicans were rightly tossed out in 2006 for their lack of understanding or respect to the customer back home.
They lost their way.
They lost their way in spending. Listen, every dollar.
But have they gotten their way now? Have they found the way?
Well, there's a good group.
Are they still lost, or are they?
No, there's a good group
Once
there.
they were lost, now they're saved.
Now they're found.
Now they're found.
They're found, absolutely, because they've got a good group of people. They got leadership from Eric Cantor to Paul Ryan to Peter Roscom. They've got folks there that understand.
But they still have Jerry Lewis, not the singer, not the comedian, but Jerry Lewis, the congressman, right, from California, the king of earmarks, right?
Well, everybody has a teammate.
They're still earmarking.
Everybody has a teammate, but you want to put a group of 40 together that could create legislation.
Let's go to the war. Let's go back a bit to 2002. If you had been in the House in 2002 and the president asked you to vote, as he did, the House and the Senate, to authorize him to take military action in Iraq, would you have voted to do so?
You know, I always tell people that's BS. That's before Steve. You know, I don't want to play a what
Well,
if.
it's a fair question, because I know you wouldn't have all the information.
Yeah.
You didn't have the information then, but there are a lot of people who didn't have that information, and they still, Obama didn't have that information. He was a state senator. He formed an opinion. You could disagree with it, agree with it. He came out strongly against the war in the fall of 2002, Barack Obama. As a state senator, all he had.
Well,
Steve Greenberg, whatever you had, what's the answer? Would you have voted to authorize the president to take military action?
Well, here's what I will tell you. I have, right from the get-go, supported the surge and the approach that John McCain has. My opponent stood.
That's a surge. I'm going back to 2002.
No, I understand where you're going.
We'll get to the surge in a minute.
No, I understand that. My biggest thing is focusing on where we've got to take the troops today and making sure that they have all the equipment. The things that I would be asking the president, if I were there, I'd say, Mr. President, do you have the kind of equipment that you know that these men and women are going to be protected through the type of war that they're going to be going through? Your father had stated what he stated about, once you get in, can you get out? You know, I would have had questions before I had jumped on that side. It's too speculative.
But you're not going to answer that as to how you would have voted.
I wouldn't answer that because I wasn't there.
The surge you would have supported, though. You weren't there for that, but that you're willing to say you would have supported the surge.
I was running for office at the point when the discussion points were in play, and you know. And
that you support?
Absolutely.
You think it worked?
I think it's absolutely worked.
I mean, because Democrats say the political change still hasn't occurred.
Yeah.
It was to provide an environment for the political change. Democrats said insufficient change has occurred politically. Obama says, hey, if you'd followed he says, I don't know if the surge accomplished this. Maybe the Sunnis just got wise and they backed off anyway.
I think that's an example why Barack Obama should not be the President of the United States. I mean, the fact is, if he can't see what's right in front of him, the reality is that our troops empowered people who wanted liberty and freedom. The surge created an environment in which it was conducive for people to step up. And the fact that Barack Obama's holding on to a tired line is just...
But overall, that war has cost this country more than 4,000 lives, tens of thousands severely injured, probably, depending on who puts the estimate out, $800 billion to, some would say, several $1 trillion in treasure of the state, of the government of the United States. Looking back, was this a mistake to go into Iraq?
Well, I would say this is, anytime the Democrats want to benchmark a department and they pick our best and brightest, I say, hey, I'm glad they found the light. Every single department. How about the Department of Health and Human Services for $697 billion a year? Who's defining success there? They build budgets not based on need, but how they spend
So you're not
their
answering
money.
that question as to whether the war was good or bad. You're saying you can ask the same questions about domestic agencies.
I think you should
domestic
ask that
programs.
question about everything. You should always ask what the definition
Do you
of
have an
success
answer for the, if somebody asks you, if somebody walking down the street, you're asking for the vote, and they say, I want to know you, Steve Greenberg, running for 8th Congressional District, on net, was this a good move or bad move to go into Iraq?
Here's what I tell people, and I say this to every person who asks me that question. This was all BS. It was before Steve. My focus is on where the troops are today and making sure we can get them home as soon as possible. And, by the way, when they get here, have a good transition plan over 6 months.
Well, this AS for after Steve, Iran,
Yes.
should the U.S. be considering taking military action to take out the nuclear capability of Iran in the future?
I think a nuclear-armed Iran would be so detrimental to this country and the world, for that matter, to our friends and allies. And it's a non-negotiable in my book that Iran should not have.
So that means military considering taking military action by the U.S.
You
that's
have
on
to
the
have
table.
it on the plate. You have to have it on the table.
Might be wise. You might say that's a risk worth taking.
I think so. I don't know necessarily if we would do it the same way as we took out Iraq, but I think there's ways that we should do that and consider it.
Should the U.S. consider Georgia an ally, not Georgia in the state, but Georgia, the Republic of Georgia an ally as they're embroiled in a potential war with Russia?
Yeah.
Should the U.S. consider giving military aid to Georgia?
Well,
Who's right, who's wrong there, and should the U.S. be involved, or should we just say, hey, that's somebody else's problem?
Well, as I understand it, this is a very new issue, but as I understand it, we were very, not too long ago, training the folks in Georgia and their military and helping them. So I'd say we are engaged in some way in this fight.
As an ally?
As an ally. They're had a free election, they're pro-Western society. I think
if you were there, if you were in Congress, would you expect the president, if he were going to get involved militarily with Georgia, assisting Georgia, to come to the House first?
Well, I think it's not a simple 1-2 answer. I would love to give you a simple answer on this. I think we have to see the effects of Russia and our relationship with Putin, because it still is Putin. I don't care what anyone says.
He was the one who went out there to see what was going on.
Yeah, I think we need to take more things into consideration before I just jumped on to make you an answer. That'd be a typical politician thing, would be to give you some quick answer, glib answer. This is a very complicated issue.
Very new issue. Ossetia, people haven't even heard of that. It's not a country, but it's something that Georgia and Russia are fighting about.
I wish there was better ways that we found out new locations in the world besides a new war breaking out. I got to tell you that much.
All right, hey, let's go back over to trade. We skipped that.
Yeah.
How important is that? Is that a major issue? And are you and Bean in sync there? She supported CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement. I guess she would support NAFTA. I don't know. Can't remember if we asked her that. So to some extent, she says she looks for trade agreements that she can support that are good for the district. She said that in January of 2006 in this show.
Yeah, I think
you agree with that statement, Congresswoman Bean?
Well, I agree, but when somebody says she's a free trader, but then she's for card check, or she's restrictive. On
What's wrong with card check? What's that?
Well, card check, it's funny. She tries to play on Mrs. Free Market, and I understand what business is all about. But then you have card check, which is the most anti-American, in my opinion, piece of legislation. It takes away the right for secret balloting if somebody wants to be union or not. She voted for that. Folks, people...
She voted for that?
Yeah, she voted for not giving people the kind of safety and protection to find out if they want to vote.
Did you say that unions ought to be able to decide this internally? Was that a rationale? You haven't talked with her?
Well, no.
You see her at Perez.
I do see her at Perez.
You pull her aside. She's... Wait a second. Do you live in the 8th Congressional District?
I am the last... my yard is the 8th District. my house is the 10th. I'm right on the line. Your
house is in the 10th, so you're right on the line,
but
your yard is there?
Not that I want to give people directions to my house.
So technically, are you outside the district?
Technically, I am.
So Kirk's your congressman, not Bean.
Yeah,
but
right.
Kirk's her congressman as well,
That's right?
Because she lives in the 10th.
I guess we'll cancel our vote for Kirk and Sales.
All right. But, is this something, trade, is that something that the voters, when you talk to them in the 8th Congressional District, they want to see free trade?
And they do, but what they want is they want some accountability for patent protection. They want some accountability for the United States and making sure that we're protected as much as possible. But free trade is obviously generated jobs, pre-free trade, post-free trade.
You're a free trader?
Oh, absolutely.
The CN Railroad, is that something like not in my backyard? This railroad wants to run through. They needed to keep costs low to move freight around Chicago, not through it. And there are a lot of people in the 8th who are against it. It sounds like Bean's against it. You're against it.
Well, Bean wasn't against it.
But she became against it?
When it became politically expedient, because all of a sudden...
You were against it from the beginning?
I was against it from the beginning. I hate to sound like Barack Obama on my side, but we forecasted the problem prior.
So she was for it before she was against it?
Yeah, absolutely. She's the scarecrow. She's carried two thoughts in her mind.
Again, we'd like Congresswoman Bean to come here and say what she was and what she wasn't. She's declined. Can't even find out where she's going to be. We've asked to be on the media list so we get notice of her press conference. She's declined to give us that. That's her decision. She can do that. But if you want to be known as transparent, if you want to be known as open, you got to come on shows like this before you get elected and after you get elected, right?
Well,
we don't endorse candidates, but we do endorse the notion, as we said then, as we said in '04 and we said in '06, we don't endorse Democrats and Republicans, but when Melissa Bean was here, we did endorse what she was doing, which was coming on the show and facing the issues. We endorsed what Steve Greenberg's doing now, is coming on the show and facing the issues.
Well, okay. And Canadian National, by the way, it's a bigger regional issue than just not in my backyard. The simple fact is that you're talking about 85% of the mitigation being spent by the taxpayers to flip that bill. That's going to take we need roads, there's a lot of things we need done. There's only so much money coming back to Illinois. That transportation system needs a broad overview.
You don't want that railroad coming through the 8th?
No way.
Okay.
No way.
Come back to that, education very briefly. School choice, school vouchers, not so much a local issue, but it is, you know, the House had a chance to vote for whether they wanted school choice, school vouchers for D.C. If you had been there, would you have supported that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think wherever we can create competition, we'll have a better respect to the customer.
Philosophically, you're for charter schools, school vouchers, philosophically?
Yeah, Governor Tommy Thompson's a very dear friend of mine and our family and in Wisconsin, and he was a leader in bringing kind of education reform, welfare reform, and be a platform I'd love to bring to Illinois.
We're going to continue to speak as the credits roll, but I very much want to thank our guest, Steve Greenberg.
Thank you so much.
Candidate in the Republican nominee in the 8th Congressional District. That election is coming up on November 4th, right?
Yeah, hopefully.
His opponent is Congresswoman Melissa Bean. We invite her here. We're fair and balanced. We'd like her to speak for herself. She's declined. Cultural issues real quick. Abortion. Would you say Bean's 1,000% pro-choice? Where are you?
I'm pro-life with the exception of rape and incest.
So you would allow an exception for a woman to have an abortion for rape and incest and also for the life of the mother?
Life of the mother.
Because we had some confusion. Bean had some confusion with your opponent. You want to watch that because you just will. Okay? You need to say, I'm giving you a hint. If in fact the exceptions you would allow were for the life of the mother and rape and incest, you need to say it every time or else somebody is going to say, hey, he didn't say it.
No,
you get it?
No, it makes a lot of sense.
I mean, you shouldn't have to if people know generally where you are.
Yeah.
Same-sex marriage?
I'm against same-sex marriage.
Civil unions?
I'm against civil unions.
Guns? Basic gun control you'd be for?
I'm a pro-Second Amendment guy.
But current gun control laws that exist, are you for, or would you like to repeal them?
No, the current...
Background checks are okay?
Yeah.
Ex-cons shouldn't have guns?
I think those things are
People
good.
Who are mentally ill?
Yeah, I think
you're
those
all for
are
that?
good. Absolutely.
Assault weapon ban, should we bring that back?
Well, I think that, the bottom line is, I know you want to get into some cultural issues.
No, but Bean said yes, bring it back, but she'd want to look at that definition. That's what she said in 2006. You agree with
So
Bean?
what has she done since?
What do you think about the assault weapon ban?
Well, I think you got to make sure. I'd have to review it before I'd say anything. But I'm a big, Second Amendment guy, and my big three issues to the community at large is focusing on getting our gas prices where they're at, remembering who the customer is. And ultimately, in Washington, they've forgotten that the people back home need somebody that's going to serve them.
Bean works her district pretty hard. Good on constituent service. Would you get her that?
No, I would say Melissa Bean.